Sweet, this should be recording. So, I'm just going to do just a quick video. This is basically because I can't go through this in class. I'm just going to turn my laser pointer on just so you can see. So, blah, 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 it's all good. So, this is week 2 of the second concept art book. It's all about sketching and how you should be sketching stuff properly. So, it's not going to teach you how to sketch because that's up to you how you do it, but it's just going to give you a few pointers about what you should try and make clear, and a couple of things you should look out for, things that are best practice, really. So these are a load of useful links. There's a lot of the information I've got from here is based on this stuff. Obviously stuff I knew prior, but a lot of this, if you want to go into more detail about what I'm covering, this is the best place to start. So, sketching for concept art. As artists, once we have started going about with creating our thumbnails and we've finished them to a usable degree, it is time to refine. So once you've got your thumbnails and you've started doing all your silhouetting and it all looks pretty good, then we can start building on top of that. So you can actually take a thumbnail and add bits over the top of it. You want to just kind of get your base silhouette to something usable, as we did in the last video. When it comes to sketching, this is where we add our details, our characterization, and where we begin to tell a story with our designs. So this is where you start doing all the interesting fun bits. This is where you start adding your stories, where you start building your character up. To become a better sketch artist and become more creative, you'll want to gather references, inspiration, and generally try to practice as often as possible. No one is really good at art straight away. Everyone has to start somewhere. Some of the best artists I've ever met have been people that have hated drawing and then they spent so long doing it and they got into it. And it's all about practice. You only get better from studying. If you find you've got a weakness in one area, don't shy away from it, just focus on that if you want to get better. Obviously, if your drawing doesn't require you to be better at that, then that's absolutely fine. But if you're a character artist and you can't draw faces, you're going to struggle. Okay? So if you are doing that, if there's an obstacle in your way, don't skirt around it, just hit it head on and get better at it. You can start with a Pinterest board and just add stuff that you will want. So you can do this for later or stuff that you think might be useful for upcoming projects. I have a Pinterest board that's really useful, I find, because I just go on there, if I'm on the bus or if I'm bored, if I'm just in bed and I'm just like, I don't want to watch TV or anything, I'll just sit on Pinterest and just find images that I like or stuff that I think is really good. There's a lot of tutorials on there as well. There's a lot of inspirational images on there. People will just put their own artwork up on there, so it's pretty good. Another starting tip is to start going outside and taking photos of things. I cannot stress this enough. Going outside is good. If you're one of these people that doesn't like going outside, that's absolutely fine. You do you. But if you want to get better at art, start taking your own photos. If you are someone that's like, I want to be an environment artist, go out and take photos of environments. You cannot get better at doing art if you're using other people's references all the time. Obviously, if it's something really, really unique, like, I don't know, you're doing somewhere that's really inaccessible, then yeah, you're going to have to rely on other people's images. But if you're someone who's sat there making trees, don't rely on pictures of trees. Go out and look at trees. It's the best thing, because you can take your own photos and you'll see it through your own lens. The main goal for a concept artist is to produce art that is detailed enough to be handed to a 3D modeler or another artist to polish up and generate a model from without having to keep coming back and asking for details. So, as a concept artist, your job is not just to come up with ideas. You also then have to polish that up. It's also called key art, so it's art that's very presentational. So stuff you'll see in a lot of art books is like the big widespread stuff that's not just quick sketches. So as a concept artist, your job is to get all the ideas down, because you will hand a piece of art over to a 3D modeler and they have to be able to get every single bit of detail from your character art onto a model. They have to be able to follow that. So a good example this is, again, why we do concept art or sketch work. So sketching is sort of the middle ground of thumbnailing and rendering a final piece. So you start off with your thumbnail, you can't really hand that off to a concept artist if you're, dead set on something. Sketching allows us to convey our ideas in a much more detailed way without spending hours worrying about texture, lighting, and colour being 100% perfect. So concept art comes in many shapes and forms. Don't let anyone tell you that concept art is one particular thing. If you are, a concept artist that's really good, like the stuff like Tetsuya Nomura, who does a lot of the Final Fantasy design stuff. He came up with the original Final Fantasy 7 characters, and then he did 7, 8, 9. I know for sure he did 7 and he moved on to Kingdom Hearts. A lot of his concept stuff is very bold and it really wouldn't work as a 3D model, but what they've done is they've taken that adaptation, taken his ideas and moved them over to a 3D model, and they're very, very similar. Now we have the technology to do that and get all of his ideas down. So you don't have to worry about everything being 100% perfect, just enough detail for a 3D modeler who might be a little bit better to get that sorted. If they can translate to 3D, you've done your job right. We sketch so we can take a thumbnail idea of something that is recognisable. Before sketching, you need to have a clear understanding of the problem you're solving or the objective for something new you are designing. Research is where the initial ideas begin to build so that you can envision what you are designing. You don't want to go into sketching as, I'm just going to come up with something. Okay, that's what your thumbnailing's for. What you want to do is you want to sketch based on references, or if you are coming up with designs and stuff, you want to have an idea in your head of what's going on. Don't just scribble stuff because you think it looks cool. That's designing stuff, so that's your ideas. Okay, if you're doing concept art, you want to be doing your actual final ideas. Sketching and concept art are not exactly the same, but again, it's a differentiation of, you won't just do a silhouette drawing and then immediately go into your final rendered piece. You have to do sketches in order to get your ideas out, and I'll show you in a minute what I mean. Sketching helps you extract numerous ideas out quickly before you enter a graphic editor to start designing the look and feel. So a graphics editor is just stuff like Photoshop. Concept art is not just about the epic or the beautiful execution. It's artwork that grows out of a design process well rooted in an idea that supports a story. So, for example, say you were working on Uncharted. You wouldn't just decide to draw Nathan Drake in a mech suit because you think it looks cool. It wouldn't fit the story. The priority of concept art and the concept itself can be identified thus: needs and wants. What the story needs has to be conceptualized first. So you can't just come up with cool ideas and then try and work it into the story later, unless the idea is really, really good. But again, that's what your lead designer and your lead story writers will be there for. The artists then provide their designs and what they want that focus and support the story. So this is an example of good concept art. So this is from Uncharted 2. So notice how they have the model facing front and back, so you can see exactly what's going on. A 3D artist could go in, and if they needed the exact pictures of the references, it's all there. You know, they haven't drawn every little bit in stupid detail. Also, just a heads up, you don't have to draw every single piece of everything. If there's like this really delicate necklace, you don't have to go in and draw everything about it. You can just take the image, like they've literally just taken this and just photoshopped it on and just drawn little bits over the top just to make it, break it up and make it a little bit more unique. If you just have a character's face and then just loads of bits stuck on top, it's going to look really awkward. It's kind of got to look natural, it's got to kind of fit. So this, they've got all their references, they've told you where they've come from. This is what you'd want, because then this can be gone and sent to a 3D modeler and go, make this. Then they've got enough information here to go, right, they want an old man with this sort of face, but enough space for them to have their own artistic license. So this is kind of what we want. Okay? So what concept art isn't? So the public idea of concept art is skewed. It's much like the idea that a game is in beta and it looks perfect. Now, a game that's in alpha or beta should look like grey squares on grey backgrounds. You will learn through this course that concept art isn't just making stupidly high quality pieces of art. Concept art galleries, concept art leaks, and press releases include polished promotional illustrations, 3D renders, reworked former concept art, and fake concept art. The bulk of concept work done to come up with designs often gets omitted or only published after the game's launched. So if you ever see something like promotional concept art, 9 times out of 10, that's designed purposefully to draw people in. Because a lot of concept art is just that. It's just ideas on a page that people are drawing just to try and see what sticks. In order to avoid promoting unrepresentative key visuals and to sell audiences an attractive narrative about super artists working on the next big thing. This presents an unrealistically high default standard for what concept art is to the general public. Having the coolest looking character with no thought to material design, story, or even relevance to the source material is just that, a cool character and nothing else. So rough template for concept and character. So this is sort of what you would want for a concept. Obviously the character would have, clothes and a face, but this sort of layout, because we can see the front, we can see the back, we're in action pose, so we can see kind of under the armpits. There's a T pose, there's a side view, so we can kind of see. So if your character's, a little bit fatter, or they've got wings or something, we could see that from the side. Key props as well. So if this is a cyclist, obviously we can see his gloves in a little bit more detail. Maybe here, what his helmet would look like, his shoes, because obviously shoes are very small, and then like a zoomed in version of the face. So this is what high quality concept art is. We don't expect you guys to be able to produce something on this scale, but this is what concept art should look like. This is the layout we'd kind of expect. Stuff like this. Obviously this is really, really high level, but again, we can see the back of the character. We don't need to see the back of the head because we've got the design here of what the hair looks like, and from the top we can see the front and the back. So an artist could take this, they could see, okay, I don't quite get how the mask's attached. Cool, we've drawn it here so you can see exactly what's going on. And then little bits of detail as well, so bits like the side plates on the arm here, because they're covered, we can get an idea of what's going on. So this is what concept art should look like. Rough template of a concept in objects. So objects are slightly different. Because objects aren't moving parts, we primarily only need certain like key shots. So stuff like guns are really good. So you'd want maybe the bulk of the rifle, say for this pistol for example, then the left side. So if your object isn't mirrored on both sides, it would be different. And then an action shot, so maybe how it would reload. So the 3D modeler and the animator could go in and do the reload animation. Something like this, like a gun. So they've got this high quality render of all the bits that can be detached. They've got all of it together. They show you sort of stuff that you wouldn't normally see, like the magazines, what the top of the magazine looks like, and then a side profile view just so you can see, okay, because this is really hard to scale, this is what it should look like if you were looking at it from a side-on view. So it kind of makes sense when you look at it from this, but again, this is all high-level stuff. So what makes for good sketch work and things that help a piece of art stand out? So perspective is a massive one. So this is why we made people do perspective at the start of the year. If your character's perspective is off and you haven't got them in some sort of action pose, it's going to look wrong. Line work is very, very important because it can show you where to add weight and emphasis. Dynamics, so if your character's stood still, it's going to look really boring, whereas if they're in a dynamic pose, like an action pose, could help. Composition, so is your character is your character art and your art in general just in a really good compositional fashion? Clear outlines and shapes, so we know what's where. And then rule of thirds and proportions. The proportion one is more important than rule of thirds, but rule of thirds is really good if you're doing environment pieces. And we'll go through all of these anyway. So, perspective is mandatory for everyone. Everyone should learn perspective regardless of what you do. Character artists, prop designers, even for natural landscape concept, mountains, trees and rivers have perspective too. Why is it so important? Perspective gives your paintings depth, scale, and makes them believable to the eye and brain if all is right. So if you're looking at something like a piece of environment art, for example, let's take Mass Effect. So you were looking at maybe the Citadel. If the perspective wasn't correct, you may think the walls are 3 foot high or 30 foot high. They could just be, very small or very far away. You don't know. So perspective is key. Wrong perspective could mess up the message of your drawing. The scale of your concepts could confuse the viewer about what you have portrayed. Even character concept artists must know it well. Perspective is everywhere around us at all times, and when it is missing from our art, it looks wrong. It's one of them weird uncanny valley things where if the perspective's off, it just looks weird. It's like if you had a baby stood, drawn next to a human being, they would look really odd because the baby would look 6 foot tall. There are 3 types of perspective we mainly use: 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point. We've covered all them prior, so we don't have to go back over them a lot. If you're a complete beginner or just having a hard time handling perspective, I suggest you start with 1 point. There are numerous free sources of information on the topic on the internet. However, you might also look for books on Amazon, video tutorials, and so on. If you're environment designers, having everything set to a single vanishing point can produce a flat, uninteresting image. It'll basically look like a kid's drawing. So if you have a house that's sort of here and another one here, and it'll look like South Park basically, where it's all just cut out and laid on the thing from one isolated view. It'll look really off. So perspective's hella important because from what we can see here, we've got this is meant to be animated. I don't know why it's not, but what we can see here is the red lines are this massive sort of cloud formation in the background, right? So we've got this huge spike, but there's 2 vanishing points, but they're all leading towards this center line here. So this is a key piece. So what everything's doing is all the lines are drawing it into this. So if we follow the yellows, what we're seeing is this is where the horizon line is. This is where everything's coming off. So this ground here, there's ground over here as well. Everything's pulling into this center line here. So this mountain shape, there's a little bit off. You don't have to stick to it 100%, but it is sort of, following this line here, drawing you towards this. this peak here, so the mountain here is bringing you in from this side. There's also mountains from this side. It's all bringing you into the centre. This is another one. So this church scene, if this was just smack bang in the centre, it'd look really, really off. Whereas you've got lines, so all the lines along here, so all these little signs here are all pulling you towards the centre because they're all focusing in that way. The roof's pulling you in. This all makes it look and feel more 3D. It makes it look like it's got depth. This doesn't just look like a really tiny window next to these flat columns. It has depth to it. Don't know why that's just popped up. I do apologise. So perspective's a massive one. There are a lot of free resources out there that will help you with that. Line work's also important. When it comes to line work, you want to focus on making sure you have broad shapes and areas that need more highly defined areas of working, basically. Things like hair scratches, etc. can be hinted at through only showing a faint few lines rather than trying to draw every individual one. So for example, this piece here, if this was all drawn with the same line weights, everything was the same thickness, it would look like an absolute mess. But because what they've done is they've done tiny detail here, so we don't have the same thickness of lines here for this statue's nose as we do here for this shadow here. They've highlighted areas that need to be darker. They've added scratches in to show where detail's meant to be. This tree tree root, for example, is thicker here because they want to separate it from all the rubble. If you have everything the same thickness, it looks really off. This guy as well. So there's little tiny scratches like things around his apron and his pants and stuff. The details on his knife, they're not super bold and thick. Okay, you've got the wrapping and that's it. His tools here, you've got thick outlines where the tools are, but the inside of his tools here aren't the same thickness as the outside. His patchwork here on his shirt, you know, the hairs in his mustache, they're not all the same. Stuff like this as well. So this is, again, perspective and drawing with different line weights. So if all of the lines on this monster here were the same thickness, it would look like a mess. You wouldn't know what to highlight and what not. You know, this would look like it's all one big spike, and it's not. It's little separate ones. A lot of stuff in sci-fi as well really helps when you have different line weights. So if you are using your lines effectively, so if we go back, right, look at the character here, right, we've got little slight shadows here, well, lines where we want shadows to be. So we know this is where the bridge of his nose is. We know his hair slicked back here. We know his jacket's ruffled around here. Whereas here, we've got, we know there's big bow lines here. We don't need to know that there's tiny little ruffles maybe here, or there's little scratches on his armour, because we've got the big bold lines here. This is up to your 3D modeler to then add this detail in. Stuff with environments as well. So, again, you don't need to have all of the stuff on the counter to be the exact same thickness. All of the signs here aren't the same thickness as the border around it. Highlight key areas with thicker lines, and then tiny details can be added in later with thinner lines. Characters again. So this is also a very good example of what you would hand to a 3D modeler. Maybe you would have this one be a back piece rather than just two front pieces. So you'd have this and you'd have a spun round so you can see what's on the back. A load of expression charts. So this helps characters as well, especially if you're doing stylized stuff. Having really overly expressive faces can help a 3D modeler and an animator when they're rigging. This also helps so you can see, okay, these are the three different designs. So these are three different sketches of what her mask could look like. Dynamics. So line weight, this goes back to line work, but also dynamics is a massive thing as well. So if we check here, right, this is a really good example. So this is how I draw lines. This is the artist that drew it. So he said thick outlines and thin details, easy to tell shapes apart, and stuff looks dynamic. So not everything looks really static. It doesn't look like something you'd find in, you know, a colouring book. Uneven and completely random line weights can make an otherwise good drawing look amateuristic, which means basically uneven. So look how he's got these really fine lines around here for stuff that should be really bold. He's got thick lines. It just looks really sort of awful. It doesn't really look like a character. You couldn't tell what's what. Thin lines, same line weight everywhere, no pen pressure applied. Looks pretty anime or technical illustration. So this is very, what I would say is anime. It looks like very fine lined. And then thick lines, it looks like a colouring book because they're big bold lines, so they're expecting people to go over the lines, right? You want to kind of do this. If you're doing character stuff, you want to make sure that your bigger areas are thicker and then your details are thinner. That way you're showing what your base shapes are after you've done your silhouettes. Stuff like this as well. So for stuff like this ship, for example, right, they've got these big, bold, spiky bits. So they're drawing emphasis to these spiky bits at the front. They haven't drawn big, thick lines here or big thick lines on the wings, or big thick lines in the engine. They've made the outward shape very thick and then all the stuff on the inside very thin. Composition is a massive importance as well. So it's mandatory for everyone to learn. It doesn't matter what school of thought you're in. Composition is key. It's why we do art. It's difficult to define precisely what a good composition can give you, so I'll just show you what bad composition can do for you instead. Badly distributed volumes and points of view would make your drawing look empty, crowded and confusing. Badly placed points of interest might lead the viewer's eye to less important details and cause him or her to misunderstand the main idea of your drawing, and so on. Okay, so we'll just run through this. Oop, we go back. Things to consider include rule of thirds, space and depth and layout. So if you're ever stuck with composition, you're thinking, this picture doesn't look right, Google rule of thirds and just see how you get on with that. I'll show you a little bit of that in a minute. So light and dark values, separate everything. So don't just have your piece be one colour or one shade. You want to have highlights and lowlights. You want to have areas of interest in areas of negative space if you need it. If your picture's too busy, it's going to look really bad. If your picture's too empty, it's going to look really bad. If you have just enough to keep the people going back to like the chapel picture I showed you a minute ago, there was enough there pointing you towards the centre of where you were trying to focus to show you the depth, while there wasn't a whole lot going off with the sky. It was just very, very sort of bland. Rule of thirds. So when making a conceptual artwork, it's very important to guide the viewer's eye properly through the concept. This is particularly true with landscape paintings, especially if there are story elements involved, such as the main character travelling and out inside of a town. So, for example, this is the rule of thirds. So you split your page up into 9 squares. Obviously, you don't have to draw the 9 squares, but this is kind of it. So the rule of thirds would state that these points here, which are at the intersections of the thirds in your piece, they're the points of interest. You could also have maybe a building here and a point of interest here with something going off here. You don't want to have a character that's just half filled this and then your point of interest being here. It just wouldn't look right. So for example, this building here. So we can kind of see this is coming in. So it's coming in through here. And again, they've just split this into 3 again. So it's a rule of thirds and a rule of thirds. So you've got this sort of third of the page is where you're trying to draw your eye. You can fall out of it a little bit as it is here. You've got the mountain here, which is kind of filling up this bit. Again, it's a little bit out, doesn't matter. So your point of interest is here. You know, your point of interest is down here. It's trying to draw you over to this. There's another example here. So this is all wrong. So see how your character's in the middle? This isn't a point of interest, and the dragon is sort of flying over this third. The castle doesn't fit. It's way too far over here. It's not even cut off at the third mark. It's not stopping at the third mark. It's kind of just all over the place. Okay, if you wanted the dragon to be interesting, you'd have it sort of here, or you'd have it filling up this, these 2 squares here. This is another piece where it sort of works and sort of doesn't. So you've got this sea creature here, which takes up, a big chunk of these 5 here. So it is following the rule of thirds. You've got an action point here, which is what you kind of want. The problem is, though, the water here isn't really high enough. It's too low. It's a third of this third here. But also, it's got all this other stuff going off. So bits up here are really interesting. But stuff down here is a lot of negative space. It doesn't really work. This, however, is a perspective and all sorts. There's loads of stuff going on. It's really complex, but it kind of all works. So you've got this skull here. Again, point of interest is this skull. It starts here. It's a little bit out, but it's 2/3 across here. It's a third in here, so it fits just in this space here, which is fine. It's not great, but it works. The floor starts off at this sort of third here. Okay, then you've got this cave that's going up, so it's drawing your eye up. There's a lot of perspective stuff going on here. So this is an overly complex image, and it looks too busy. It looks really good, but it's too busy, especially when you're starting off. So if you're new to composition, if you're not really good at drawing, or you're not confident in drawing, you can't get away with drawing stuff like this because it will look awkward. But when you get to the level of, my artwork doesn't really need to be that close to the rule of thirds, then you can start experimenting with pushing stuff. Then you can start going about, okay, why do I not want this at the action point here? Well, because it's meant to be this spooky, dark place. So it's meant to make it feel awkward and evil and uncomfortable, okay? So that's why it works. But stuff like this dragon, it doesn't work because this is a fantasy scene. right? There's not meant to be dread because this is all nice and lit and bright. All this is lovely green. You know, I'm not getting the idea of dread. Whereas this dragon, I can't tell if this is spooky or not. Whereas a big old skull fortress, yeah, that's meant to be spooky and horrible. That's, you know, that to me shouts danger, do not come here. And because it's not hitting this interest point here, it feels more jarring being here. My eye is instantly like, this doesn't feel right, doesn't fit in this bubble here. So it makes me feel even worse about it. So you can break the rule of thirds to make stuff feel bad, but I wouldn't bother with it until you get to a point where you are comfortable enough in drawing stuff like this. So for now, follow the rule of thirds, even if it's stuff like this. Follow the rule of thirds, and you can't go wrong. Clear outlines and shapes. So again, this goes back to silhouetting. Combining different shapes and sizes together in a shot creates the perception of intensity. Intentional overlap in images also develops cohesion and relationships between and amongst characters and environments. So I'll give you an example, right? So shape language is something we will get into. It's probably either the next video or the video after that. So when you come up with your sketches, we're going to go through how to tell a story with a character. Okay? So, for example, this piece here. Nice, easy shapes. So if you were just to show me this, just a circle and a triangle, this could go any way, but I know full well that there's something here, and it looks like it's leaning towards this. Okay? And that's what they've done. They've got this giant sort of animatronic floating turtle thing heading towards the tower. Shape language. So you've got this tiny square here. So the idea is that these three are bringing sort of gifts to this character here, right? So you want them to look slightly imposing. This is a young child, and these are three giant grown-ass, you know, these guys do not skip any day at the gym. So you want them to look intimidating. So if you just draw them as squares and it looks good and you can tell a story with just a couple squares in a circle, then yeah, your piece is going to look great. We haven't considered the people in the front. We don't need to. The main story is here. These are just set dressing. This is just set dressing. This is the story right here. These three dudes and this child here. And if you can tell a story with just a couple shapes, you got a really good story in your hands. You've got a really good piece in your hands. Little tips. So, differentiate different textures. To show different textures within your sketch, you need to adjust your technique. You wouldn't want to shade skin the same way you would shade metallics or fur. So, for example, this is kind of an example of where it works and where it doesn't, okay? So, stuff like these sleeves here, like they're meant to be like really puffy, like jester clothing. Well, it kind of looks like clouds, which is fine, but it also, there's ruffles around the character's neck here, which look really, really intense. So these, even though they're meant to be puffy and frilly like this, they look completely different. Well, stuff like the horns and the, you know, this, what looks like curtains over the character's eyes, they are really unique because they don't look like they're shaded the same as everything else. They look kind of alien, which is kind of cool because I think that's what they were going for. This creature at the bottom, even though it's also meant to look alien, it looks kind of liquid because the way it's shaded. It's not super dark and bold. They've gone bold around the outside, and then they've coloured all the stuff on the inside with like less than 50% grey. So differentiating textures helps. 70-30 rule. So 70-30 rule isn't a set rule, but it's something that I think helps, especially when you're coming up with your concepts later on. So less can be more. The 70-30 rule helps you create effective compositions. The idea is that 30% of your sketch is filled with the main focus, and the remaining 70% is filler. Well, you know, stuff that's not necessary. But it's still relevant. This less interesting area helps direct attention towards the main subject. So notice how you aren't distracted by areas you aren't meant to be focusing on. So stuff like this. The face takes up, so this area here is 30% of the sketch, whereas the other 70% is just stuff to help build this up. Okay? So you follow the lines, 30% of the sketch is this area. So the horns, the face, and then this part of the hair that's coming down and the robes. Okay? Whereas the rest of it, this other remaining 70%, it doesn't distract from the face. It extends what you're trying to do without you spending a couple hours trying to make this look good as well. So the sketch itself gets the idea across without you having to spend hours working on unnecessary bits. Make sure your shapes are readable. This is again going back to silhouetting. From the overall form to the least visible prop, every shape must be readable. Even in a busy setup, the effectiveness of information is not dependent on the details. The readability of shapes is. Even if those shapes were stripped of details to the point of silhouette, they would still be easily definable. a story that I found I thought was actually really interesting when I was doing research for this was World War II pilots were trained to identify specific enemy ships just based off their silhouettes. So, for example, this character here, really cool design. You know, I can tell there's this mechanical horse, and he's got all this. Oh, he's got, you know, there's a sick rider and this woman here. But if I was just to see this and I had none of the detail in the middle, I couldn't tell you what was going on. Maybe I could tell you the horse, but none of this detail in the middle makes any sense because you wouldn't see it. It'd just disappear. It would just not show up in a silhouette. So this is why having an interesting silhouette where it's definable makes sense. If you were trying to define a character just by the bits you can see here, it would really suck. But if you've got a definable shape that makes a lot of sense, you can tell what it is, then you're onto a winner. Less is sometimes more. Again, going back to less is more. In designing what's supposed to be a repetitive pattern, such as bricks or a wall, or organic patterns like rough textures on rocks, always apply the economy of lines. Okay? So this can be done through a less is more approach. This is either the simplification on purpose removal of detail. So again, if you're drawing rocks, you don't have to spend 7 hours drawing loads of rocks and loads of detail. You could just go in and give us the bold shapes. We'll tell it's a rock. As long as we know, okay, we'll go over with some sort of weird, like some light brush and just give it that little bit of breakup. We can tell this is a rock. We do not need you to go in and draw every little nook and cranny and crack of this rock. We can tell what it is. So sometimes you will find that. Sometimes you will design stuff and you're like, oh, I'm drawing a spaceship. Well, you don't have to draw every single bit of paneling on the spaceship. Just draw the main ones. We can kind of tell from a distance. You don't have to draw every single nut and bolt on an engine unless you're sending that over to a modeler who has to do every nut and bolt. Just give us the broad strokes. So stuff like this. So you can use 3D as well. A lot of people will say, using 3D is cheating. No, it's not. You do anything you want to try and get your art over, okay? A lot of artists will say, oh, but it's cheating if you've used you've taken a character and you've drawn over it. No, it's not. It's not cheating. Provided you've painted over it enough to make it unique. If you're just taking a character you found on Google and then just drawing a jacket over it, then yeah, that's kind of not on. But if you're taking a character and you're drawing different hair and you're changing things up, changing the pose, adding detail, changing the face up, you're just using the character as a base, then that's perfectly viable. If you're someone who really struggles coming up with composition, but you're quite good at 3D, you can build your set in 3D, render it in something like Marmoset, which is a rendering software similar to Maya. You can put all your lighting in and then just paint over the top, because what the engine does is it works out all your lighting for you. All you have to do is then go into this and paint your details over the top of it, because you've got all the hard bits worked out. This is perfectly viable. Do not let anyone tell you that you cannot use 3D models and 3D modeling and lighting and 3D setups to help with your 2D. Really extremely talented people will be able to paint this straight off the bat, that's fine. But if you're struggling and your 3D and your 2D artwork sucks, or you think it's awful, and you're like, God, I can't get perspective right, I just can't do it, get some 3D out, stick it in Maya, maybe put some lights in the scene, then go in and paint your details, because this has worked out all the hard lighting stuff for you. All you'd have to do is you'd have to go in and work out where lights are coming from, and that's it. Okay? Is it cheating to use reference? No. Absolutely not. It's pretty much the only way to design things properly, unless you're a super mega genius. If you've got 4,000 IQ and you can see into the future, then absolutely fine, you can do it without reference. But at the same time, if you've got that high an IQ, you probably don't need to be doing this course. So, what are you? You're insane. Reference, every professional artist I've ever met has used reference, or uses reference, or has an entire folder of Pinterest of just things. I know one artist that has a particular folder of like 200 images of just hands, because they were like, I really struggle drawing hands, and I constantly need a new supply of hand models just so I can have a look at how different hands look. Gathering references and resources. Concept artists are tasked with creating something from nothing. The best artists create things nobody has ever seen before while still being believable. You take this from real-life reference. The artist's visual library is a crucial part of the creative process. If you don't have a Pinterest, I would suggest you get a Pinterest after watching this video. And I might actually set that as the task for this week. Many artists only draw from life, and this can leave them chained to reference. How do you draw a dragon creature if you can't look at a real dragon? There's always the internet, but what if you don't have that? Now you're relying on memory. This is where your visual libraries reside. Feng Zhu put up a detailed video explaining the visual library. It's not as complex as you think, but it's probably more important than you'd assume. So Feng Zhu is a fantastic concept artist. This video is really detailed as well, so click on the link once you've finish this video, or I'll put the presentation up anyway. Not everyone has access to an airport or a hangar. If this is where photo reference and other creative artwork belongs. Did that just skip an entire presentation? Cool. So collecting visuals. So let's say you want to start building your own visual library. This should be something in your head, but reference is always important because humans rarely make something without inspiration from real life. The first step is to create a visual library folder on your computer. Create as many internal folders as you want. Safari animals, house exteriors, bookshelves, pretty boulders, whatever the hell you want to draw. If you do not have a pretty boulders folder, I'm going to be disappointed. Everyone should have a boulder folder. Spend time doing weekly studies with these different visuals. If you want to create airborne vehicles, then make a folder of photos and art featuring aircrafts that appeal to you. Collect resources with aesthetics and designs that align with your goals. If you do focus studies, you'll grow quickly and learn a lot about the object you're studying. This will inevitably lead to your internalization of the visuals with different elements and concepts to try in the future. So if you really suck at drawing, say, planes or pretty boulders, get a load of boulder pictures or plane pictures and draw them. Okay, don't shy. Going back to my point from before, don't shy away from doing artwork because, oh, I can't do it right away. Tough. No one can do it straight away. Okay? Think outside the box. Don't just copy a reference. So temptation to copy every pixel of a photo reference is always there for an artist. People and things obviously don't look the same in a photo as they do in real life. So remember that the reference is there for you to gain information about the proportions, value, edges, and colours. So, for example, someone here has done this picture. Now, this is an exact copy. You know, they've not got the exact shade of grey here for the face, but they've taken enough from it. Like, the eyes are slightly different. The nose is slightly dark around here. But they've taken enough from it where you can tell it's the picture, but it's not an exact copy. The lighting in the reference photo should be the most important consideration for an artist. In order to understand the structure of what you are drawing or painting, you must have proper lighting. The lights and darks need to be clearly visible and understandable. You probably won't get to lighting until later on. For now, all I want you guys to do is look at how you're going to sketch your stuff. So getting your ideas down on paper. Don't just draw everything really bold. I want to see sketch work. I want to see you showing me your designs, because the more designs you show me, the better marks you're going to get. Okay? If you're just going, this is my finished character, and I see no sketch work, I don't see any faint lines, I don't see any of this stuff, then it's going to just appear to me that you just rushed it. I want you guys to actually try. This is why we're giving you this extra work and this extra piece, because I want to see people improving. Because, again, having good 2D skills will help with your 3D. Having really good 3D skills will help with your 2D. They go hand in hand. Sketching inside of Photoshop, what I like to call the Gareth method for quick idea generation, and it is trademarked. The best way to set up a scene in Photoshop is to begin concepting. For concepting is to have your background slightly off white, so 25 to 18% grey. So basically, go into Photoshop, go to your photo bucket tool, go to your colour selection, and make sure if black's on the 0, white's on the 1, set it to about 18%. Or 82% if you go the other way. Okay, have it at like a quarter, so it's light grey. Okay, that's all you need, light grey, this colour grey. Set your brush flow, opacity, and whatever else to about 20-25%, or higher if you want to be more confident. And then using pen pressure, plot in some black, cut away with some white, cut back to black. You can actually do this relatively quickly. So if you set both your colours to black and white on your brush select, this also works in other tools as well, like Photo P or Clip Studio. If you press X on your keyboard, I know for Photoshop it's X, what it does is it swaps between the two colours, so you don't have to actually go in and erase stuff, you're just painting over stuff with black, that'll be quite faint like this, then you paint over it with some white, then paint some more grey, more black, some more white. If you're constantly stopping and starting, going in with an eraser, you lose thought, but if you're just doing black, white, you can go and you build up layers, and your work looks a lot better. This took about 2 minutes, just to get this shape, because it works. You're just colouring in shapes. Oh, and this needs to be more white. This needs to be a bit more dark. This needs some black here, some white here. You can go and you can create all the different shades you want. It's absolutely fine. You'll start seeing that your two tones will mix to create shape and shadow and shade. Don't worry too much about the colour at this point. You can worry about that later. Obviously, these settings are adjustable to your preference, but as you will see on the board demonstration, it quickly builds up. So that's it. Obviously, if you've got any questions, just pop them in the Google Classroom. If it's not me teaching, it will be probably Nikki or someone else. So ask them questions and they can pass them on to me. If you get stuck with anything, just chuck me an email. Other than that, yeah, sketching should be fun. I don't want to see people complaining that, oh, I hate sketching. Because I'm just going to ask you why. And if it's just because you say you're crap at art, I've got news for you. Everyone's crap at art when they start. Everyone. I've known artists that were 3D modelers for 10 years and never did 2D. Then they decided one day they were going to do 2D and they sucked. A year later, they were amazing because they put the time in. You know, if you put the time in, you're going to get better. It's, you know, they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. That's also the definition of practice. So is practicing insane? Probably. But if it's something you enjoy and you enjoy, even if your work's crap, if you don't enjoy doing sketching because you're not good at drawing, then that's the same as anything. You know, you hate something because you're not good at it. Well, that's tough. If you want to get good at art, or you want to be really good at art, you've got to have to put the time in. That's it. If I'm going to give you any advice, it's that. Just practice. If you think something sucks or you suck at art, just practice. That's it. It really is. You cannot get worse at art. You cannot unlearn stuff from art. It's really difficult to do that. Anyway, that's everything. If you got any questions, chuck me an email. Cheers.